Hey, welcome back to Talking with Guy. Today we have the Historical Committee Marie Lailer with us, and we'll be talking about the history of Whitman, Augustus Whitman, a man who's been a ghost for me, um, and also a little bit of Marie Lailer's past and how she got to where she is.
Well, I started off living up in Brookline.
Hmm.
When I got married, I moved down here, bought a house, had 2 children, and decided that I still needed to do something. So I got my EMT license, worked over in the city of Brockton while I went to nursing school. Spent 30 years in the nursing profession in the emergency departments.
Hmm.
And when I retired, I realized I needed something else to do. So I don't know how I got involved in history. The town has always fascinated me. When I first moved down here in the 70s, you'd still catch a horse or a cow walking down the street periodically
Whitman.
in beautiful downtown Whitman. A family down the street from us, they had a farm, the Drass family, and periodically one of the horses or one of the cows would get out, and they were very mild-mannered, and you just take them by the bridle and walk them back.
Wow.
So the town has really changed.
Yeah, no kidding.
But a lot of the history stays. And the fact that the town started out as just a little extension. The town of Abington was the one that started it. Abington included the towns of Whitman, Abington, Rockland.
Mm.
And then each of them broke off. So Abington started as the large piece. Then I think we were settled right after Abington, but remained part of Abington. We were called South Abington or Little Comfort. Rockland was included in that large geographic area. Mm-hmm. And then Rockland broke off, and then Whitman broke off. So in 1875, we had to figure out where we were going to go as a government. So they made the decision on town government, which includes town meetings.
Yeah.
And the town has grown ever since. But one of my loves, not only the Whitman Historical Commission, but the Dyer Memorial Library up in Abington. I'm a trustee there also, and that is the library that focuses on Abington, Whitman, and Rockland. And it's fascinating because now one of the things I do is house surveys. So I'm currently doing a house survey on a house on the corner of Harvard Street and Auburn Street. Mm-hmm. And in finding out that was built by a Major Micah White back in 1817.
Who would that be?
Well, Micah White turns out that he was a pretty interesting guy. He was a constable, a tax collector for the town from like 1809 right up to 1817. Mm-hmm. And Micah was collecting the taxes. Of course, a little different back then. You would run into him at the grocery store and you'd say, "Oh, I need to pay my taxes." And you'd hand him the $10 and he'd put it in his pocket. Now, what he was supposed to be doing was handing it into the town.
I feel like you said
he was building a house.
Oh, wow.
So in 1817, the town treasurer, Sam Norton, found out that, ooh, we're missing a little bit of money here.
No kidding.
So he went back in the tax collecting rolls and found out that Mr. Micah White had not been paying his taxes. In fact, he had been building this very extraordinary house on the corner of Harvard and Auburn Street. Now, in doing the history, we find that the house sits here, and we know that East Bridgewater, if you go down Harvard Street, is probably another third of a mile down. Well, before the boundary lines were set, Bridgewater was just across the street. So at one point, the man left his home in Whitman, or left his home in what was then South Abington, and went to Bridgewater.
So,
But the Bridgewater line was right there, so all he had to do was cross the street to get to Bridgewater.
so they had no jurisdiction on him, or would
Well,
that
they
be
did. They actually took him to court, and they did recover a lot of the money. And all of that paperwork exists up at Dyer Memorial Library.
Oh,
Yeah. Dyer is an amazing repository of history of this area. We have a Civil War researcher right now that, while I was up there the other day, came in, said, "Did you see this?" And we were like, "No, what did you see?" And he found a sheet of paper that had 6 British captains that resigned their commission with the British Army to join the revolution on our side because they believed, so we're talking 1774, they resigned their commissions to join the revolutionary forces here in the United States.
was that a common occurrence or no?
I don't know. I had just never seen, this is an original document that we found with this Civil War researcher.
Oh,
Yeah. They have the actual, I guess it's called the Covenant or the Constitution that was written for the town of Abington back in 1817, I think. So, phenomenal history.
Okay, we're gonna go a little bit back, because you mentioned a couple of things. The like back into like your early uh, 20s and like teenage years. What was the things that you're interested, like electives that you had in high school, or what was that period of time was?
I was active in a lot of physical activity. When I went to high school, we didn't have a gym because I went to a private girls' high school, so they didn't have a lot of athletics. But they had drama clubs, and they had glee clubs and choral clubs. So I played piano, so it was sort of natural that I would get into that end of it. So that's what I did in high school, and spent a year, like many people, at Framingham State College and majored in cards and drinking and decided that school wasn't for me
Yeah.
and went out and got a job.
So around what times would you say? Because I can see some remnants of what you talk about. There's like the horse, because I believe like by 7-Eleven and Supreme Pizza, there's like a old horse tractor, like just it's broken down, completely in ruins, but it's like just laying there on the side of somebody's lawns. So I
No,
don't
you're
know.
correct.
I don't know if that's
Whitman started out as an agricultural community, and it grew out of the fact that when people moved in here, the thought was that they'd be able to graze and they'd be able to grow things. Well, our soil is not great for growing, but what we did have was we had huge white pine trees. So they found out that by cutting trees and milling trees, that it was a great business. Very early on in the history of the town, they were involved in making tacks. So there were a lot of tack factories here in town. In fact, two of them, one of them is the D.B. Gurney. And the D.B. Gurney is the longest running tack factory in the town and in the world, evidently. Then there was the Dunbar, Hobart, Whitman tack factory. Now, these were all tacks made by hand. And that was the largest tack factory in the world. D.B. Gurney still exists here in town. If you go over by McKinnon Funeral Home, if you look at the McKinnon Funeral Home and look at the driveway to the left, you'll see the tack factory sits way back.
Is it still operational?
It is still operational. It is. It's run by, I think, the 8th generation of the Gurney family.
Because I believe Whitman has two famous factories. One is the Toll House chocolate.
Okay. Well, that wasn't really a factory. That started out as a restaurant.
Oh, okay.
And that was positioned right on Route 18.
Oh, so I had it completely
right
wrong.
At the intersection where Wendy's is now.
Yeah, I saw the Toll House sign. Yeah.
The Toll House sign will be back. It was taken down in December. The town has an agreement with the owners of the property, which is Walgreens, to keep that sign in repair in perpetuity. So it was reported to me recently that the sign was in very bad disrepair. And I contacted Walgreens, and the sign is currently out being repaired.
Nice.
So it will be back. But the Toll House was a restaurant.
I thought it was a factory, a chocolate factory.
Grew right on that corner. In fact, at one point back in, I think, the 50s, they had a garden room that the building came out and around and was built around a great big beautiful tree. But one of the things that the cook at I'm trying to come up with her name, but it'll come to me. The cook at the restaurant was looking to make a new cookie.
Chocolate chip.
So she had made one of her regular cookies, and she said, wouldn't it be cool if I added chocolate to it? So she took a chocolate bar and scraped the chocolate into the cookie, and the Toll House cookie was born.
Yeah.
So the Toll House itself burned down December 31st, 1984. It was horribly distressing because so many people within the town remembered it as growing up. It was a lovely restaurant. People went there for special occasions. There were a lot of weddings there. So when it burnt to the ground, everybody sort of hoped that they would rebuild. But it never happened. So then quite a few years later, the Nestle company got involved, and they packaged the Nestle Toll House cookie recipe. So that's the recipe that we still use that's on the back of the Nestle Toll House morsels packaging.
So they kind of kept that little bit of history still alive.
They did. They
That was
did.
kind of nice of Nestle.
And I was out in San Antonio, Texas recently, and there was a Toll House cookie store.
Really?
Yeah, and it's owned by the Nestle company, and they use the original recipe for the Nestle Toll House cookies.
Wow. When are we getting our own?
I know. I was so shocked to see it. It was really fun.
Let's go back to the town of Whitman, the separation. Why did we change our name from South Abington to Whitman?
To Whitman? It's an interesting story. Well, because we were Abington, and we were the southern part of Abington, people started to realize that we were South Abington. We still belong to the town of Abington, but in order to establish another town, you had to have specific things like a church. So the churches were established, and then the town decided that they were so far from Abington Center that they would establish their own center. So we became Little Comfort, then we became South Abington. And then I don't remember the date, but it was interesting because the name Whitman did not come up initially. The options were Grandin, which was the middle name of Oliver Grandin Healy, who was one of the builders in the town.
Mm-hmm.
He built the first 4-level building in the town. Standish was another name. I have no idea where Standish came from, unless it was Miles Standish.
Who's Miles
Brainerd.
Standish? Who's Miles Standish?
Miles Standish is a gentleman an Englishman who started out down in Plymouth and who negotiated a lot of treaties for the Indians. So he was very well liked, very well respected in the community. So they thought Standish. Then they thought Brainerd. Don't know where that name came from at all. But then one of the other names that was added very late in the election process was Whitman. And that was because Augustus Whitman donated the land for the park.
Oh.
So when he did that back in 1880, everybody said, hey, why don't we name it Whitman? And Whitman took the name by a landslide.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Yeah. That park is quite a staple in our community.
It's an amazing place.
Yeah.
It was first designed by Frederick Law Olmsted, who was a famous architectural landscape designer who came out of Brookline. He's known for Central Park, the Boston Common, the green spaces in Boston. He was a landscape designer all over the country. By the time he and Augustus Whitman got together, Augustus passed, and then Frederick Law Olmsted had passed. But his son-in-law, who was in the business, took over the responsibility of completing the designs for the park. So we can't say that we have a Frederick Law Olmsted Park, but we can say that it was originally designed by him.
Nice. Okay, so there's a few, like, there's not much of Augustus Whitman on the internet. So there's a few things about Augustus Whitman I kind of want to get into. As one, his early life, and also what business, because everybody said, everywhere I've looked, is like Augustus Whitman worked and he got rich off that work, donated the park to Whitman, and then that's it. It's very open-ended. So I was like, what kind of business was Augustus
All right,
Whitman
so
into?
Augustus Whitman was the son of Jared Whitman.
Mm-hmm.
You know where the new building is going in downtown, beside the 7-Eleven and beside Family Dollar?
Yeah, the greenhouse.
I don't know what it's being called. It's a great big new multi-story building, for a little modern.
Yeah.
But that is where there was a bank for many years. Before the bank, that is where the Whitman homestead was. And that's where Jared Whitman raised his family. And Jared was important because he was a representative to the state from the town of Whitman, and he was an attorney.
Oh, okay.
His son, Augustus, lived here until he was about 18, when he went to Phillips Academy. He then, I don't remember where he went to college, but he never really came back to Whitman after that, but he always considered Whitman as his hometown.
Yeah.
So in the years that he was alive, in fact, he's buried here in Whitman. He's buried at the Colebrook Cemetery. Augustus went out to Worcester. And while he was out in Worcester, he developed blades for a mowing machine. So I would assume that it was for, like, mowing the grass.
Mm-hmm.
He was involved in the Whitman Barnes Manufacturing Company. He was the first president of that. He was a bank president. And in 1874, he retired because of some really serious health problems. So he decided at that point that he needed to find something else to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided that he would import cattle from Europe and raise thoroughbred cattle. So that's what he did in his retirement. So for the last 6 years of his life, he bred these shorthorn cattle. He never married. And in 1880, out in Worcester, he was thrown from a carriage and killed instantly. And that was the end of him. And very sadly, he was 59 and unmarried, so there were never any children. Mm. So he was very generous. I forget what I think he said he would donate it to the town. I think the town maybe paid $1,000 for 5.5 acres. And it would be kept as a park in perpetuity for the people of the town. Mm. One of his sisters donated some money towards the town, and since then the Friends of the Park, which is a private committee, has maintained a Friends of the Park committee. They have done a lot of improvements. They have added things. The town swimming pool was added, I think, in 1959. The bandstand was one of the original pieces. And the DPW is currently, they need to do some repairs on that. So recently a couple of people submitted photos of the bandstand from 1906 when it was built. And they are going to try to restore it to what it looked like back then.
The Whitman has a tradition every summer with the Whitman concert. Was that something that was from way back, or something that's just currently just brought up?
Well, when you look at the history of the town, there was a lot of musical activity going on. When you look back in some of the books, I will give you a couple of the pictures of the books as we go along so that you can post them with it.
Yes.
But the town of Whitman had a lot of bands. Some of them were marching bands formed, like Commonwealth Shoe had their own marching band, Regal Shoe had their own marching band, the GAR had their own. Each group seemed to have their own marching band. It was back, I think, in the 40s and 50s, there was a fellow by the name of Les Bowles, B-O-L-E-S. Mm-hmm. And he was a musician, and he formed a band that was pretty well known. And they played at a lot of functions and, I guess, marched in parades. And so you will find in some of the books some of the history of some of the musical occurrences here in town. Mm. I know when we came down here in 1977, the Knights of Columbus in town had a minstrel show. Mm. And that had been going for quite a while. That was a yearly project that they put on. And the town hall was used very frequently for flower shows and all kinds of happenings. If you wanted to do something, that you rented out the town hall.
Really?
Just like we had the champagne cake and art that the Cultural Council put on last weekend. And that was a great take-in. It was so nice to see the town hall being all dressed up and used again, not only for town meetings, but for gatherings of people.
What part of Whitman's history you find that's most fascinating?
I think I find the house history is the most fascinating. Houses have been built in Whitman from the 1700s on, and some of them still exist. Not necessarily in the same place. Years and years ago, because we weren't hooked up to electric, plumbing, everything else, if you decided you wanted a new house on your property, I could sell you my house. And your responsibility would be pick it up and move it to your property. So we didn't have overhead lines. The trees weren't as big. As long as you got permission from somebody else's property, you could cut through somebody else's property to move the house.
Oh,
So picking up a house and moving it across the street, moving it down the street.
like a fully built house.
This is a fully built house. So when the town bought the land for the town hall, there was a house on that property.
Really?
So the guy who owned it owned property on Broad Street. So he picked up the house that was on the property of the town hall, sold the town hall property, and moved the house to 61 Broad Street, where it still sits.
Whoa.
Other people took their house and they moved the building that was the main house back and added on to the front of the house, or built a new house in the front and connected the two pieces. So that wasn't unusual years ago.
So that's why if you go down Whitman, none of the houses are really uniformed, unless it's like
Exactly.
a brand new neighborhood.
Exactly. And they were built any place from the 1700s. So the house that is on the corner of Harvard and Auburn Street, the Michael White House, was built through money that wasn't his. But it's a very interesting house because it has 4 chimneys. Back then, 4 chimneys were very expensive to build. So as you get into the 1800s, you see Cape Cod houses. The Capes have high slanted roofs because snow in the winter, you wanted to slide off the roof. And they were most commonly built with one central chimney. And they were built that way because of the bricks. Bricks were expensive. So you built one chimney in the middle of your house that had 3 or 4 fireplaces to warm the lower level. And the chimney went up with one flue.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So buildings have changed.
Yeah.
Then we had the revolution of the shoe factories coming in, and we needed housing. So people started building lodging houses like the Linden House. We had the Grandin House. There were a lot of like one-room rental boarding homes. And then as people started to get some money, you have people such as Clarence Atwood, who built 120 South Ave, which is a big, beautiful home. That was right. He was the general manager of Commonwealth Shoe Factory. So he built his house across from the factory so that he could sort of overlook it.
Yeah, it's like, this is where I made my fortune.
The Dunbar Whidden tack factory. Do you know where the Park School is now? Park Ave School?
Yes.
Okay, so down on South Ave. That was the Whidden family estate. So where the Park Ave School is was a beautiful, beautiful home. that was built by the Whitman family, and it was quite the landmark. That was torn down, let me think. That was torn down, and the land sold to the town for use of education only. So then the town built the Park Ave School back in 1959. And unfortunately, because of the asbestos,
Yeah.
the roof leaking, the basement is flooded, it needs to be remediated. There's no way the town can build on the property
Yeah.
until it's remediated. It's going to cost more
Yeah.
to remediate it than it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you know where the Diamond Fuel right across from there.
Yeah.
Okay, so that little segment of land was another big mansion, the Hiram Jenkins Mansion. And again, that was taken down, I don't know what date, by the Jenkins family, who still has people here in town.
Really? It's
Jenkins
just
descendants.
wait, that little strip of land.
That little strip of land. So when South Ave comes down and Old South Ave cuts across.
Yeah.
So there is a monument there for the Hobart Bell Factory.
Yes, which I thought that was the only thing that was there.
I just want to bring up the Hobart Bell Factory because there were about 100 bells made here by Hobart.
Mm-hmm.
They were the first bell foundry in the United States. Hobart wanted to cast bells. He didn't know a lot about it, so he found a deserter from the British Army that knew how to cast bells.
Mm-hmm.
So Hobart set up a blast furnace, and I think it's up actually behind those houses off of, what's that first street there? Is it Dyer?
Yeah, I think it's there.
Okay, so it's right in that area. And he cast about 100 bells. He did try to cast cannons. He had a problem with that because the metal would cool too fast and it wouldn't anneal. So when he tried the cannons, they exploded. So his cannon casting didn't work really well. But the bells, he started one bell in 1791. And with the work of Paul Watson and myself and a few other historians in town, the bell still sits in the Seabury, New Hampshire Congregational Community Church in Seabury, New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And Paul and I had the opportunity to go up there, and I climbed up through the belfry, and we climbed up through the roof, and we actually found the original bell. It says A.H. Aaron Hobart, Abington, 1791.
Whoa.
It is the only known existing Hobart bell left. And it was cast right here in Whitman.
Yeah. A little fun fact I've learned about from our previous guest, Justin Evans.
Yes.
He did say that Paul Revere. I'm trying to remember exactly the words.
Okay, so Paul Revere, when he offered a bell up in the North Church, cracked.
Yeah.
And Paul Revere was the first guy to raise his hand and say, I can fix that. Except for he had no bell casting knowledge. So he said, but I know who can.
Hobart.
So Paul Revere sent his son down to Hobart. Mm-hmm. And either Hobart or Gallimore or one of their workers went up to Boston and taught Paul Revere how to cast bells.
Whoa.
Paul Revere, as we know, was a silversmith.
Yeah. All right. I believe we're running on time.
Okay.
And so I've really wanted this conversation to go further, but I think we went a little bit past.
That's okay.
But yeah, thank you for watching and coming again to Talking with Guy. Um, See you the next time.